Hi, I'm James McGuire, and on today's eSpeaks, we're talking about multi-cloud computing, a pretty hot topic in the enterprise these days. We'll explore how companies can build a multi-cloud strategy that streamlines operations across multiple clouds. To discuss that, I'm joined by a major industry expert. With me is Amanda Blevins, Vice President and Chief Technology Officer for the Americas at VMware. Amanda, very good to have you with us today.
It's great being here. Thank you very much.
So multi-cloud computing, obviously it has become really a default deployment option. I read a survey, I think it was a year ago, maybe even a couple of years ago, that said something like multi-cloud use in the enterprise, more than 90% of companies are using it, and the average amount of clouds they're using is 3.2. Don't know if that's still fully accurate. It might even be greater by now.
Yeah.
But I think, is there a sense, I mean, do you have a sense of what those numbers are these days?
Yeah, I think the latest numbers, it's still below 4, but I think it moved up to 3.7. I'm not sure
Oh,
3.7 clouds, but that's the number.
but first of all, this strikes me as like a lot of complexity. I mean, we'll get to that. But I think as much as the term is bandied about, I don't know if there's a exact clear definition. I mean, some companies are thinking hybrid cloud, some are talking multi-cloud.
Right.
As much as we use it, let's get a clear definition. What is multi-cloud as you see it?
Yeah. Yeah. So like you mentioned, people have been running workloads in multiple clouds for some time. And that might have not been as intentional as it should have been.
Mhm.
Maybe there was a project or a strategy behind it. But a lot has changed over the past 5 years from when people started these projects and the technology that has evolved and the lessons that have been learned. And so now multi-cloud is about having an intentional strategy to be able to run your workloads where you choose. So have that optionality and choice, but then also be able to secure and govern and manage and observe and all of those things. So it requires being able to use the native cloud services that you want, but also having multi-cloud services available to you to be able to abstract away some of the complexity of individual clouds.
Interesting. Okay. Well, I'm thinking that some of that 3.7 clouds per company may even go back a few years where, shadow IT, maybe a division had the corporate a credit card and they said, you know what, IT can't get to this fast enough. We're just going to log onto this cloud provider. They'll take care of it. And all those accounts never got shut down. And I think some of that is probably still going on with multi-cloud these days.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think it's also some folks use SaaS clouds, so Office 365 or Salesforce or something like that. We're talking over Zoom. So I
Right.
think some of those numbers are specific, requirements of running a company, and some of them are more of where do we run our workloads as a business for our own customers.
Mm-hmm. All right, let's talk about the idea of multi-cloud services. What are multi-cloud services and how is it emerging as a new category of IT services?
So multi-cloud services are the class of services that provide the same capability you might find in a single cloud across multiple clouds. So, for example, a lot of folks, run in AWS, so they run in Azure, and they leverage the native cloud services available to them there. So, hey, I build up my application, I use AWS RDS, or I'm running in Azure, and I'm using Azure SQL services. But the problem is, as soon as they've standardized to a native cloud service, such as in AWS, and they want to start running workloads in GCP or Oracle IBM or somewhere else on-prem, they don't have those AWS services available to them.
Hmm.
So if we have the multi-cloud service where you can have a database on demand in any location, regardless of the cloud location, it could be a public cloud provider, it could be private cloud, it could even be at the edge. That's when you get a multi-cloud service that supports 2 or more clouds for that capability that you need to run your business, build your applications, be secure, et cetera.
So I take it that VMware is offering this as a service to its clients.
Yeah, so there are 5 layers to a multi-cloud architecture. So first is the multi-cloud data plane, and just like we talk about other things as a control plane and the data plane. So you could think of multi-cloud services as control planes. But the data plane is just where all the objects are created, where my workloads run, where my VMs, my containers, my databases, et cetera. The next layer up is a multi-cloud infrastructure service. So this is how I could manage, observe, control, deploy, et cetera, configure my infrastructure services across multiple environments. So that could be managing virtual machines, managing containers, looking at the performance of applications, looking at the cost, managing Kubernetes across different environments. And then we need to, work, security is a big concern right now. So we need to make sure that we have multi-cloud security services. Instead of, having to deploy multiple solutions for each environment, it means that we're deploying multi-cloud security services so we can have the governance and control and safety across all of our environments. And then we move up to the application layer, multi-cloud application services, like the example I just gave before. And then the top layer is multi-cloud end user services. So being able to allow folks to work in flexible ways, hybrid workforce, et cetera, but also managing their access to these applications and services that are being consumed in multiple clouds. And yes, VMware does have solutions in all of those spaces.
Mm-hmm. It seems like that fourth layer, the application layer, might be, well, all of them offer their own challenges, I imagine. It seems like application layer might offer its challenges in that some companies might think we have real portability between clouds, but that's easier said than done.
Right.
What's your take on applications as one of the challenging areas of multi-cloud?
I think that was one of the first use cases and reasons folks went to public cloud was, hey, we get this velocity because I don't have to deploy the infrastructure and manage it and then deploy the database, system, and then, then deploy the database on top of it, et cetera, right? It's more, we went to AWS and we started consuming these application level services and we could build up our applications quickly. However, as soon as somebody wants portability, then that doesn't work. They have to rewrite it. So things like VMware's Tanzu application platform and our other cross-cloud application services allow folks to have the same development tools, the same development processes. And so that way, when they decide to run their workloads in Azure, AWS, or GCP, or on-prem, or at the edge, whatever it might be, they are not having to pick and choose different technology and different operational processes and siloing themselves. Instead, they have one platform to develop on and deploy where it makes sense.
All right, well then I guess what you're really saying, VMware is cloud agnostic.
Yes, we are cloud agnostic. Our platform is available in hundreds of thousands of workloads, if not millions of workloads, run on vSphere across the globe.
Mm-hmm.
And folks have been using that on-prem and at the edge for many, many years. Over the past few years, we've partnered with hyperscalers and other cloud service providers and sovereign cloud companies to be able to have our platform available everywhere. So that is one thing that we're very well known for: virtual machines and containers on vSphere, on Cloud Foundation, on VMware Cloud as a Service. But in addition to that, you don't have to use VMware technology to run those workloads. You might use AKS or EKS for Kubernetes, and we have the capability to manage and secure those through our multi-cloud services there. Or you might want to consume some of those native public cloud service in conjunction with a multi-cloud service. So it is about optionality and choice. And so we allow you to run your workloads where you wish, and we can manage, observe, and secure them where they're running as well.
All right, so run them where you wish. What about the idea of, it seems like a lot of companies are hungering for the idea of a single pane of glass that can manage all their clouds because they have 3.7 clouds. They're
Right.
trying to figure out how they can manage it all. What's your day? Is there going to be, on the other hand, it seems like an elusive goal. I go, we'll never have a single pane of glass because the cloud providers have different, it's apples and oranges. They do things differently.
Right.
Will we ever have a single pane of glass in the multi-cloud world?
I think that there's solution areas where we can, right? So something like the example I gave of Tanzu Mission Control, we have a single pane of glass when it comes to Kubernetes management, configuration, audits. We can tie in our service mesh solution, so there's a single pane of glass for that encryption and security. But if you think about a single pane of glass across all of those layers, across end user and security and applications and infrastructure, I don't think that is possible. Not anytime soon. There would, the better approach would be to have the integrations where necessary, to use DevSecOps and CI/CD pipelines and things like that, to have that awareness and integration, to make sure that you're thinking of those separate entities or technologies in a zero trust architecture approach. So there's, there needs to be integration awareness. But I think in IT, we've tried for single pane of glass for as long as I've been alive, and we haven't gotten there yet. So.
I'm not giving up hope. I think there's going to be some wild startup that offers that, and people will scoff at it. And like in the year 2028, they're going to actually make it work. I don't know, but we'll see, I guess.
Yeah.
I mean, it could be VMware. I mean, if anyone offers it, it could be VMware. The terminology, back to the terminology question, the idea of multi-vendor and multi-cloud. How are those two different ideas?
Yeah, I really like to think of multi-cloud as that intentional strategy where not only am I choosing the best of breed where it makes sense, per cloud for those applications or data scientists and analytics, but also I'm choosing multi-cloud services where it makes sense to abstract away some of that complexity, give that portability, give a single pane of glass in that layer, a single interface where you might do DevSecOps and things like that. And multi-vendor just means I'm using multiple technologies. And so some of that technology, like a lot of VMware tech, might be, the cross-cloud services that solve for multi-cloud. And, sometimes I'm just using, AWS services or Azure services, or I'm using Snowflake or et cetera, et cetera. But I just want to stress to everyone that's listening that it really needs to be an intentional choice, because otherwise it gets too complex and out of hand very quickly.
What do you mean? How could it not be an intentional choice? Like, in other words, maybe people signed up without knowing, or what? I mean, without maybe fully thinking it through ahead.
Yeah.
How does it get to be non-intentional?
Yeah, I think at the beginning, of course, there are pilots and proof of concepts to see, what is it like for us to run applications in AWS? What does it mean to develop for Azure? How do we consume these GCP services? And there was pockets of this discovery. And oftentimes in IT, pilots become production
Right.
in a blink of an eye, and we didn't mean for it to happen. Or we acquire their companies and they have technology running in other clouds. Or a developer team or a line of business team identifies, hey, we can only use this cloud with this solution because that's what the vendor supports, et cetera, et cetera. So it really has exploded over the last few years. And now folks have realized this, and IT leadership is now trying to get their arms around it and say, okay, we know what we have. We know that, this works really well over here and this is good over here. And the rest, maybe we can collapse that back into a multi-cloud service. Maybe we can repatriate some of those workloads back to on-prem. That happens as well. So it's really about evaluating current state and saying what makes the most business sense and has the biggest impact, and what do we do just because we wanted to see how it worked, because we're techies or we're excited about it.
One minor point about the repatriation. I think it's interesting that I hear more about that. I'm kind of surprised that there's any repatriation going on. Is that above minimal, the repatriation, or is it actually is somewhat of a trend?
I think it is a trend. I think one of the biggest repatriation stories started maybe 5 years ago, 4 years ago with Uber. I remember that being a great example of, the amount of money that they were spending in public cloud. They could build out an on-prem infrastructure that lasted for many more years than what their public cloud spend was. So a lot of times it is related to spend, because if somebody builds out a private cloud properly and efficiently, it will always cost less than for those public cloud workloads. So a lot of that repatriation has to do with cost. I think it also has to do with, back to what we were saying about the shiny newness maybe wearing off, and making those business, intelligent decisions around where should we really run these workloads in our applications.
A super interesting point you made about someone could build a private cloud, and if they do it properly, it's going to cost less than a public cloud. I can just hear someone saying, but wait a second, that private cloud isn't going to scale like that public cloud. So, oh no, I disagree with that. So what do you say to that individual who makes that point?
Well, I've worked with many, many customers and partners who have done this, where they have gone into cost analysis of running and managing and operationalizing these workloads of private and public. Just the cost of the infrastructure, the hardware alone that these workloads are running on is significantly less, for what even small startups pay for resources in AWS. They could purchase hardware and it covers only 3 months of the AWS bill, right? For what they need. So there's a lot of evidence out there around the cost of the infrastructure. And so that's really where that evaluation needs to be made of, okay, maybe it costs more, but these specific native cloud services, like I really need Google BigQuery. That is what's going to make a big change in my business and be beneficial to us. That's okay. I'm going to spend that extra money for that. But maybe for these other workloads, I don't need all these other features. I don't need somebody else to do operations for me. And I want to bring it back into an environment that's, has better cost benefits.
Yeah, makes perfect sense. Um, let's talk about people issues, because like it is an issue when it comes to multi-cloud. What about the companies that they're not thinking about staffing necessarily in terms of cloud talent and how that impacts their strategy? What are your thoughts on that issue?
That's been coming up a lot this year. The conversation I had near the end of last year was with a Fortune 10 company, and they asked me the question specifically around, is public cloud still being adopted as quickly as folks talk about it? And if so, where are they getting the people to make this happen? Where's the talent coming from,
Right,
right?
and it's, even they find it, it's going to be expensive.
Exactly. And they're a Fortune 10 company, right? So for them having trouble finding talent, and then I continue to ask these questions, similar questions to other, leadership folks in many different industries across the globe, and they're all having the same problem where, one, we can't find it. Two, if we do find it, those folks are highly skilled and therefore, very expensive. And then three, if we did manage to hire somebody with, pre-existing skills, or if somebody got trained up inside, then they get hired away by, one of those tech companies that they just learned all about.
Right.
So I think that does need to play into the decision making. If you say I have a public cloud strategy or multi-cloud strategy, just using one cloud is difficult, right? There's so much more to learn. There's so much new technology. There's different architectures for applications if you do it properly, et cetera, et cetera. So much goes into learning just one cloud technology. If you're going to choose a multi-cloud strategy, then you have to really evaluate your talent and the folks, on your teams to say, do I have enough folks that have enough time to learn this new technology? And how do I retain these really smart, excellent folks to make sure that my business is stable over the next couple of years?
So, all right, you've talked about how to strategize for that, but am I hearing partially that maybe in some cases some companies may need to scale back their ambitions because of the talent piece?
I think so. I think it'd be maybe scale it back, but also maybe focus it and say, instead of I'm migrating all of my applications to public cloud, like target and focus on the applications that make the most sense to run in public cloud, whether there's a regulatory risk requirement to have it there, whether there's a speed and velocity and innovation factor that makes sense for it to be there, whether there's a, laws of physics, geolocation requirement. But just don't say I'm doing everything without, having that evaluation. So the folks that are learning, those teams that do support it, aren't overloaded, because it might be harder to build out those teams.
Last question. I'd love to get your sense of where we're going in the future with multi-cloud. If we look, say, short term, midterm, maybe middle of the decade or so. What is multi-cloud going to look like, and will there be less chaos involved than there is now, perhaps?
Well, I sure hope so, because a lot of people are being heroes every day making this work, right?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, at VMware, we want folks to go from, cloud chaos to what we call cloud smart, and be able to have that optionality and choice. Use those native public clouds as it makes sense. Use those multi-cloud services as it makes sense, and align to your business and the folks that, the talent that support and run these things. And so I think for companies to have this this advantage, for companies to be more successful, for them to lower their spending but get higher benefit, is it's important to have that multi-cloud strategy and then move to that. So ideally, we will see more multi-cloud adoption, multi-cloud services being put into place. Otherwise, we'll just continue in that cloud chaos approach.
Interesting. Amanda, I think you said it. It's a lot of good stuff, and it's going to be a super interesting sector to follow. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise today.
Thank you very much. It's great speaking with you.